Welcome back to the channel. We are here once again with our Cub Cadet 149. If this is your first time joining us, there's a playlist for this thing, which I'll link right up there and down in the description, so you can go get all caught up if you want. What we're here to do today is try and address the transmission leak on this thing for the third continuous year. Each year of the last three, I've tried to repair a transmission leak on this thing that just seems to be getting progressively worse. And this year, and actually last summer, it was really bad. So bad, in fact, that what you see in that pan right there is only from about the last 2 weeks. Most of the winter, I left this thing just sitting on that cardboard, which was a massive mistake. I just forgot to put a pan under it. And the primary reason I haven't been able to fix it is because I haven't been able to figure out exactly where it's coming from. I found a couple spots in the last couple years that I thought were likely culprits, but apparently not. In fact, like I said, last year, I think I actually made it quite a bit worse. This year, we're actually gonna find out where on earth it's coming from. As part of that effort, this year I actually got the thing outside and pressure washed all the old oil and grease and crap off of it, so maybe I can see where it's coming from. Plus, I put some of this stuff in it, which is multi-purpose oil dye. I'd seen this stuff marketed before to use in air conditioning systems, and I've used it that way, but I've never seen a formulation for just regular oils, like this is good for engine oil and everything else. This bottle in my hand is enough to do the transmission oil in the tractor 4 times over, so I just went ahead and poured the entire bottle in. And I rated my air conditioning tools supply for my 12-volt UV flashlight. So it's just a flashlight that's basically a black light. You shine it around, and the dye reacts to the UV light. It's probably too bright in here for it to do it right now. Actually, you can just kind of see it under the tractor, kind of flashing green purple there. Between actually cleaning the thing up, putting the dye in it, we should be able to see where the oil's actually leaking now, I hope. So I'm gonna get out of its winter hidey hole, and we're gonna start checking it over and see if we can figure out what's going on. And there's a little better view of the dye reacting to the UV light. So hopefully we can find out what's going on. And of course, I'll link all this stuff down in the description for you. So let's start at the top here and work our way down. Regular viewers of the channel will know that that blue gasket in there is a gasket I actually custom made last year for this pump adapter, because I was pretty sure that's where it was leaking. And as part of that diagnosis, I also checked over these valves to see whether or not they were leaking, because several people have told me that they like to leak around these buttons, which is true, but this one doesn't. So there's our UV light. The camera doesn't like focusing on it, but there's nothing going on. The gasket will kind of react. I think that's just because of the color it is. But I don't see anything obviously leaking up top. So for everybody that says it's leaking here, it isn't. We got deeper problems somewhere else. And it also doesn't look like it's leaking around the lines or the line adapters or anything else. I don't see anything glowing UV. So now I'm under the thing, and it looks like I didn't get it pressure washed as nicely as I would have liked. It was the middle of January by the time I got to it, so give me a break. But I'm not seeing anything that's just screaming gigantic UV leak. Down here, I can see it turn green, which some of that might be the grass that's still on it, and some of it might be oil. And I can see some green, like back behind this strap. So maybe it's leaking behind the pump. We'll take a look at it from the other side and see if we can see anything any better. It looks like not really anything jumping out to me. I see this is lighting up kind of green, and we've got the same dribblings up front that are turning green. And this thing has just gotten parked here, like within the last 10 minutes, and it's dropped a drop on the floor. It's right from about there. So that's just a drip coming down. I think I'm gonna turn off the lights in here and go around this thing with a regular flashlight so I don't hurt myself and this thing, and see if I can finally find where it's going. Well, good news and bad news. Good news, I've concluded that none of the other repairs I've done are what's leaking. So my custom gasket's fine. There's a seal up in the front of this thing that I elected to not replace last year. I was confident that's what was screwing me up this year. It isn't, it's not leaking. The suction tube at the bottom, not a problem. All the leaks, at least as far as I can tell from the dye, start at pretty much right here. So they're running right down the front of the transmission behind the pump. And that is the bad news portion of our current events meeting here, is to get to that. And what's funny is I've repaired that on this exact tractor once before, like 25 years ago-ish, but it wasn't this transaxle. This transaxle's been swapped out, so this one's still factory. Anyway, to fix that, I've got to split the tractor. If you don't know what that is, when you split a tractor, you basically take this half of it and roll it away. So some tractors, it means a little bit different nomenclature than others, but basically you take the front and separate it from the back. So to do this on this one, you have to take the fenders off, you have to take the drive shaft out, disconnect the hydraulic lines. Take the seat off is optional, but it's easier. Disconnect the brakes. There's some wiring harness crap that needs done, so on and so forth. It's not a small job. It's not the worst thing ever, but it's not small. and I'm debating whether or not I really want to do it right now because I should probably be mowing in about 2 weeks. And I've also got a brand new wiring harness for this whole tractor. And to install it, you have to split the tractor or at least take the fenders off. That could become a huge project, bigger than I want. Just give you a little better idea what I'm talking about here. This is basically all the stuff you can see under the tractor. There's the suction tube, there's the filter, there's the front of the pump. This gasket here, number 23, is what I'm pretty sure has failed. And it's leaking back here. And I can't access any of that without pulling the whole assembly out of the tractor. So this $7 gasket is like an entire Saturday worth of work. But I suppose the first thing to do is to get the gasket, and then we can decide what we're doing. Alrighty then, that last part was filmed over a year ago. Parts have been ordered and have arrived, and it is now like 13 months later, and I really need to get something done about this. It is leaking ridiculously badly now. And I'm pretty sure it's that one gasket, but it did occur to me that it could be, there's like a top cover plate that goes on the rear axle too. And I may not have to actually split the tractor to do that, but I was just kind of out here looking over things, trying to reacclimate myself to the process. And I noticed there's an inspection cover on the fenders that I either never saw or never paid attention to before. So we may be able to pop that cover and just take a quick look and get a better idea what we're in for. And that is the cover I'm talking about. If you hear that lawnmower running in the background, it's one of my neighbors mowing for like the 3rd time in the season. And I have not mowed for the first time yet. It's supposed to rain for like the next 5 days straight too, so. Oh yeah, that's the dude literally next door. Anyway, yeah, cover offers a little visibility. Yeah, a little visibility for me, but not nearly as much for you. I'm gonna poke around a little bit in there and see what I can see. Nah, that was pretty useless, but it is cool to know that that's there, because the next time I pressure wash it, I can pop that cover and get down and blow off the whole top of the axle. Maybe that's why it's there, I don't know, but you can't really see crap looking down in there. So my next move is to pull the fenders. If you've never done that before, there are 4 bolts on each side. If yours is from the factory, there's probably going to be slot head screws, and I don't envy you trying to get them out of there. You're probably going to need an impact driver and a torch. I replaced mine with hex bolts a long time ago. There are also 4 screws under the seat by the battery, so 2 there, 2 there. And I'm also just going to take the seat off by pulling the seat hinges, just to get some weight off so it's easier to deal with. Then we'll have to disconnect the wiring from the voltage regulator right there. And when I get to that point, I will probably take some pictures just so I know what color goes in what, because I have done that wrong before. And then it's going to be time to pretty much just get the fenders off of it. So I'm going to get as far as I can with the simple stuff. So just taking the bolts and stuff off, taking the seat off, taking the battery out, etc. And we will catch back up. Alrighty, so I got the battery out of there. It's time to document some wire connections. The ground was run on it right there. And then it's got a real nice looking repair kind of patch on it there over to the voltage regulator. That was me a few years ago, but I'm not the guy that originally put the red wire on the ground. Our voltage regulator itself, these wire colors are about impossible to see. This looks like black, this is green, and that guy is yellow, I think. And on these newer style voltage regulators, there's also like a line that comes out of the back that I guess you're supposed to use for like your factory headlights. It's like an updated regulator. I think the difference is that it feeds the headlights from the battery instead of directly from the generator. Like I think this pulls off of the generator directly from the factory, and this guy changes it to pull off the battery circuit or something like that, I guess. I don't know. The newer ones is supposed to be an improvement, so there's a little bit different wiring. But I just want to put this back the way I found it. I am probably going to get paint marker and try and mark the wire and the terminals, since these wires are basically just all black now. And that is what I've done. You can see I painted my top wire blue, my next one down white, and then the third one, which I'm pretty sure is yellow to begin with, I just painted with some more yellow since I had one. It's also vaguely coming back to me what I've got going on here. I believe I ran a jumper to the terminal that's on the bottom of this thing to come out to the terminal where this would have connected to the factory. That's why it's got this big lump of tape on it. And I believe how I did all this before is I just unbolted it here, and then you've got to go inside the fender and unbolt the bottom one, and then you can pull this back and have a little more room to work on things. That is for sure how that ended up taped up. So I'm just gonna probably yank that guy on off of there so I can get all that dealt with more or less easily. And that is exactly what happened, except those guys were nutted and bolted, so there was a nut on the other side. So an upgrade, if you are doing this and have the time, would be to weld the nuts on the other side of this so you don't have to fidget with them. And as I suspected, that was just the jumper wire to that rear terminal I was telling you about. That just brings it up to where the original terminal would have been, that guy. So that's the upgrade routing. And then this one I had forgotten, the terminals that go in there are not spade terminals, they are ring terminals. So you have to take the screws all the way out to get them out. And there is a ground that runs down here. This is the ground I added. I'm gonna guess it was there before as that red wire, but it must not have been in very good shape. And it goes on that lower bolt, and it has to go on the lower one because that's where the ground strap off of this thing is. And you can see it's rubber isolated, so if you don't run the ground to that lug, you don't get a ground. And then finally, the taillight wiring harness, at least on mine, down here under the right-hand side, it's right there, just disconnected. Then I think 4 more bolts and me fenders come off. Fender delete. And here is that plate I was talking about, and I've gone around this with the UV light and I don't see anything, and this is all RTV. This would have been a gasket from the factory. So somebody has been in there sealing it up already. I don't think that's what's going on because I can't see any leaks, and somebody has already fixed a leak, presumably fixed a leak. So that brings us back down here, and if I hit it with the UV light, you can see all that streaking, and you can see the streaks above that pipe. Just a moment ago it actually left that drip on the floor right there. That was up there, but we can see all that indication all the way up around and up in there. You know, basically as far as I can shine the light and get an eyeball, you can see that it's been leaking oil all the way down to this point right here. So I'm pretty sure the gasket that I think we need to replace is indeed the one we need to replace. So we got to split the tractor, which sucks. Now I'm just trying to kind of think through and remember what splitting this thing actually means. I know we have 2 bolts on each side down here that hold the transmission assembly to the frame. The brake levers, those are the adjustable levers for the disc brakes on each side. Those need to come off. Drive shaft needs to come off, which we've seen that quite a few times on this channel. The L pipe on the bottom that we were just looking at a minute ago, it will eventually need to come off to be able to get this pump apart from the rest of the housing. So I think I'm going to do that now because that's a handy way to drain the oil too. Those hydraulic lines will need to be disconnected, and the forward reverse linkage, that guy right there, that'll need to be disconnected. I'm hoping we don't have to mess with the cam or anything. I'm not sure if the bolts that hold it in actually hold this whole pump on too. If they do, that sucks because that cam, you have to adjust it to get the forward reverse motion of this thing just right, and it is not much fun to adjust. But all in all, I think that's going to be about it. So I've had it sitting and draining fluid overnight, and I did a few more things to get it apart, like I pulled the drive shaft bolts, and I noticed that I skipped mentioning a bolt here and there that you need to pull in order to split this thing. The next thing I'm going to need to do is disconnect the directional control linkage and the brake neutral return linkage right there. Maybe a little bit more clear what I'm talking about when I push the pedal. There's directional. When you put your foot on the brake, that other lever works against it and returns the transmission to neutral. And this is the cam plate that they both attach to. I really don't want to disturb this. That's all held together with a snap ring, and you can see that I had to stuff a washer behind it to keep it all tight enough so it doesn't fall apart, and it has given me trouble in the past. So what I'm going to do is disconnect this ball joint at the linkage, and then down there I will disconnect the clevis at the rod. So I need to pop a cotter pin out, get that pin out and take the clevis off, and I don't think it'll be a big deal to get that done. And then I think it'll actually be time to actually remove all the bolts. They're all broken loose right now, and then kind of jimmy this guy on out of there. If I recall correctly, you do have to kind of walk it on out of the frame of the tractor, and it's a lot easier with 2 dudes, but there's only 1 dude today, so got it up on jack stands in the front, jack under the rear axle, all the bolts are out, which, speaking of, from front to rear and left to right, those are the bolts. They are all different lengths. Actually, those 2 look the same for the rear right. Front ones are stubby on both sides and they appear the same. And then this guy had a huge spacer on him. I'm not sure why. And these are different lengths, including that huge spacer. So I'm gonna guess some of this hardware is not original. But FYI, this has signs of sealer on it. And I imagine that's because it goes all the way through into the housing. And it didn't leak before, so I'm likely gonna put sealer on it again. You can see that this flange is also a lot wider than that flange, but they still both go into the housing. So I'll probably just put sealer on all 4 of them. But anyway, I think that's it. I think it's ready to come on out. I question how easily it's gonna happen, but we'll find out. Barely managed to get my drain pan back. Remember, that pipe isn't in there, so I don't need to worry about bending it up. Okay, I just saw the pump and everything go forward. Just putting it on the jack and trying to slide it backward isn't working so well. There it goes. Oops, I forgot a lever. That lever right there goes down to the brakes. Just need to pop that cotter pin off and get it out of there, and then this guy should be free. Alrighty, let's try this again now that everything's disconnected. At least I think it is. Oh yeah, imagine that. Undoing all the shafts makes things easier. Okay, It is now totally supported on the jack. And there it is, one split tractor. Transmission and such that way, rest of the tractor that way. I'm probably gonna wheelbarrow this guy on up out of my way, back into its usual storage space, just so we have a little more room to work on this dude. Just get him on out of there. And you can literally just pick up the back of the frame and wheelbarrow one of these around. All the weight's at the front now. Now that this appears to be way more of a mess, we can get back to it. So finally, we can confirm where this is actually freaking coming from, because now we can see. And I think you can see the dye reacting. Like you can definitely see it reacting on the towel there where the oil's still dripping out because I'm an idiot and should have taken that filter off last night. But you can see it's kind of left that staining on the side of the transmission. And if I get right up in there, it may be difficult for you to see, but you can see the shade of the light is actually purple. When you move it back there, it turns green. Well, the problem is grass also illuminates green on this thing. So what I actually found to be more helpful was just a normal flashlight, which is not at all helpful for you. See if I can illustrate here a little bit. I think so. See how this flashlight picks up a shine right there, right in the corner? That is actually all wet. And if I come down here and harvest some out with my finger, there's what it looks like on a clean finger. And there it's illuminating green on my middle finger there. So that's definitely where our leak is coming from. It's coming from the interface between this pump and then the actual rear end or transmission or whatever. I don't actually know what you would call all this stuff. This guy, one way or another, has to come off of there. I'm not exactly sure how to do that just yet because this is so covered in filth. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time with a rag and brushes and whatever and try and clean some of this up so we can get a better idea of what's going on. But I have been able to at least confirm that it was mandatory that we split the tractor because you just can't take this crap off of there with this in there. So this had to be done regardless. Alrighty, so I got it cleaned up as well as I could. FYI, this old Cub paint does not seem to like brake clean. So I'm not too worried about that in the case of my tractor. This is not a restoration, but something for you to keep in mind. But I think we're there. I think we just need to pull these 4 bolts. So 2 on each side. And that the whole pump assembly should come off. This one is one of the adjusting bolts for this cam assembly that controls your forward, neutral, reverse position on your lever, and it is a nightmare to adjust. First thing I'm gonna do is make sure that bolt is still snug before I take that one out. Also, I think it was this one, but like 5 years ago, I had to helicoil one of these. And so I'm gonna have to take it kind of easy there too. So what I'm gonna do is just break those 4 bolts loose, and then I'm gonna rotate this thing all the way down. So when I pull it, anything that might be trapped in there, like dirt and crap, hopefully falls straight down and not straight down into the rear end housing as it is now. You might not be able to tell because of the way you're looking, but this is tilted up about 45 degrees right now. All the bolts are loose. Oh yeah, she's ready to come. And in fact, a couple of the bolts were kind of loose when we started, which that sort of sucks. I doubt this is just a loose bolt problem, but we are in it to win it now. I'm also noticing some of these bolts are different lengths in different locations. I think that's more of a factor of this is a 50-year-old piece of junk tractor that 35 guys have worked on. I'm going to assume this is going to weigh something. I can get a best grip on it that I can. Yeah, it does weigh something. Not as heavy as I was fearing. Oh yeah, there's a big rip right in the bottom of that gasket. Okay, well, good. We're not wasting our time. Oh. And I would guess that chunk I just pulled off there weighs about, I don't know, 30 pounds. Not as bad as I feared. Let's get a better look at what's up. Now the 2 holes on either side are actually for dowels from the looks of things. But this guy in the middle, that's got a pin in it. Okay, so there's a pin in there that engages that hole. And I thought that was a rip. Maybe not. Boy, I'd love to see just a smoking bullet on this one. Well, anyway, that's the guy we're replacing. That's what we're here to do. Yeah, you can see all this down in here is just absolutely soaked and greasy. So, reasonably confident that has been leaking. Whether or not that is the only place it's been leaking. So the move now is going to be to get all this cleaned up and get that as de-oiled as I can. There's actually like, looks like maybe some rust on it too. Yeah, like all that discoloration around there, that's actually rust. And I'm going to put this on with high-tack, which is like a gasket cement. So I definitely don't want anything that's rusty. Like that's rusty right there too. Really the only place that isn't rusty is right here. So I'm gonna guess that's where it's been leaking. We'll get all that cleaned up. Probably just with a wire brush. Probably by hand. I'll get some clean towels to ram jam down that hole. Once I get done wiping this all off, I'll probably take this guy and stand it back up again. So it's a little easier to work with. But yeah, that's the idea. Getting all the way down there is why we had to spend like, I don't know, 5 hours splitting the tractor in half. Alrighty, well, it turns out these holes down the bottom are actually through holes that go all the way through the rear axle case here. And since I do not want to get any wire brush bristles down in my rear axle, I've just taken some of these guys, which are, you know, the old school regular earplugs. You just roll between your fingers to squish down so you can get them in your ear and then they expand out. I've got them in there and I've very carefully just pushed them down underneath the surface so I can just carefully wire brush over the top of them and hopefully not lose any bristles from my brush down in those holes. And if the worst thing ever should happen and one of those goes into the rear axle, it'll be a lot easier to find that guy than it would be to find a single wire off of this thing. At the end of the day, if one of those went through a gear set or a bearing or something, it wouldn't be good, but it'd probably be better than sending metal through it, so I'll take my chances. I also imagine these are not too terribly oil resistant, so I don't want to leave them in there very long. And then we have the inverse of the same situation going on down here, where I need to clean that gasket face up, and those are pins that are coming out of that thing that engage those holes. I'll be spending quite a bit of time just getting all these surfaces cleaned and prepped and ready for our new gasket. Alrighty, so I ended up telling just a couple of lies here. One, I did end up cleaning that up with power. I just used these really soft wire brushes for my Dremel, or my not Dremel, generic Dremel, and just real carefully went around it, kind of, you know, in through the pockets and such where I could, because the machining on this is so rough that there was really no other way to do it. You can probably actually see the machining grooves and you can actually catch all those with your fingernail. So it's extremely difficult to get those cleaned out by hand. I would have been at it for the rest of my life. So I just took it real easy with my wire brush and got it all cleaned up. The other lie I told is, despite it not being tractor restoration hour and it being about 20 degrees too cold to paint, I believe I am going to just paint this face in here as well as I can, because I'll never have another chance to do it. Even if I decide in the future that I want to restore the tractor and split it to give it a paint job, I'm not going to pull this pump back off again if I get that well sealed. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to tape off the hole and just hit it with maybe a few coats through the evening or whatever, and we get whatever we get out of it. If it's not an awesome job, I'm not all that worried about it, because really nobody's ever going to be able to see it anyway. I'm also a little curious about some of what I thought was rust actually looks like red oxide primer, and you can see the hallmarks of somebody else being in here painting before anyway. So I really don't know what's going on here. I don't know if these things were primed at the factory or what, but we got the good stuff. Oh, this is the can from like 2 years ago and the tip's plugged. Bummer. Oh, take a minute and see if I can clean that out. A little bit of acetone, a little bit of compressed air, and I think we're back in business. Okay, I'm going to give that a few minutes to tack. It's been about 10 minutes. I'm going to actually hit it with a good coat this time. And you might notice that as soon as I turned the camera off, I went ahead and just hit those 4 pads too. It's not spraying all that well. Alrighty, I'm gonna call that good enough. I'm gonna get my tip in some acetone, see if I can get it cleaned up and try and save this $30 can of paint. Probably 2/3 of it left, but that's enough paint on it for me. We'll probably leave that just chilling out and drying for, I'm gonna guess about the next 20 hours and then reassembly time, I hope. As a matter of fact, just to make sure I don't mess around with it forever, like come out here every 4 hours for the rest of the night and just put way too much paint on it. And I'll take my chances with the small holes. I don't want to risk the earplugs deteriorating in them overnight or anything. So we're gonna call that good. There's no chance I'm gonna come out here at midnight and retape that. So is what it is. Tomorrow this thing is getting put back together. So it is the following day, and from across the room, that looks pretty good. Once there's a bump and everything in there, you'll never really be able to see it again anyway. But at least now if I ever actually do want to paint the thing, that'll be, close. Probably more than Cub did when they built it. Moving on, it is now time for me to clean up the gasket face on the pump itself. You can see I've done the same trick and stuffed an earplug in there, except this hole, it's only deep enough to go partially in. That's okay, it'll keep crap out. Got some tape on the splines, and then this green stuff you see around there is what I thought would be a type of grease, but not really. There's an open bearing right in there, so I wanted to pack it with something so I don't get a bunch of junk or wires in my bearing, because that would be bad. And what that is this stuff, which is called assembly goo. I bought this basically as a replacement for Vaseline for holding gaskets in place for assembly, and that's more or less what it's sold for. But this stuff is specifically marketed for automatic transmissions and hydraulic pumps, which, hydraulic pump and stuff like that. Specifically says it won't plug up filters and won't cause priming issues and all that good stuff. So for the, $7 or $8 or whatever a tub of this stuff cost me, I'll just have it around to be able to use it for when we have jobs that need it, I guess, the proper thing for the right job, right? When I get done cleaning this up, I'm still gonna do my best to clean that stuff out because it's gonna be full of junk. If a little bit gets through, it shouldn't hurt it any. Now it's just a matter of doing the same thing I did on the rear end housing and just take my Dremel wire wheel and clean this guy up significantly. This is an aluminum casting and this is super corroded. So it's a really rough surface. I would really like to see that get a lot better before we move on. There it is, all cleaned up and ready to roll. And this is the guy that was the source of all the trouble, 9213004. The small snag here is it looks like one side of this guy is adhesive already, which is gonna kind of mess up my high-tack plan. I'm gonna have to be careful with how I deal with this. I think I'm going to use the self-adhesive side on here, just to hold it there for me, because high-tack does take a little bit of time to actually set up. So yeah, I believe that paper backing comes off. And I'm trying to remember this from the last one I did, but the last one I did was like 25 years ago. Time flies. Same tractor, different rear end. This backing is not being overly friendly to get off. Careful, there we go. Starting at a hole location was dumb. Let's go over here. There we go. Yeah, it is definitely self-stickied. Just gonna mostly try and align it on that port, because sending cork through my rear end would probably not be awesome. Looks like I did an okay job. If you couldn't tell, this is sitting on my roll-around cart, so I'm gonna make a little bib here for my high-tack, because this stuff goes everywhere. Oh boy. Oh yeah. If you've never used this stuff, it is like super goopy syrup, and that is kind of how it applies, so you just have to be careful. Normally I would set a gasket on like a piece of cardboard and paint it on the cardboard, but since we had a self-sticky side, that wasn't really an option here. I mean, it was an option, but I would have made just a horrific mess getting the thing actually installed. And they also have spray-on versions of this stuff. I've never used those, but they probably work just fine. What I'm trying to do real delicately there and failing at somewhat miserably is to get some around that porthole, but not in the porthole. I probably should have done that one location before I peeled the backer. Oh well. And like at the top of it there, that's really thin. Like I would be willing to guess that's where the old gasket failed. Yeah, I think we're just gonna try and clean up after the fact, the way this is working out. I think maybe I need to stir my stuff too. It's a little more goopy than I recall. Maybe I can thin it with some acetone or something, I'm not sure. See what I can do about cleaning it out. I wonder if maybe a Q-tip and some acetone would be a good idea here. And whether or not it's a good idea, I think I'm gonna try it. So my desired amount of high-tack in that hole is 0. And I am radically exceeding that right now. Q-tip and acetone. Oh yeah, turning purple. Yep, that looks pretty good. While I'm here, see if I can touch up these screw heads, because I may at some point want to try and get a wrench in them again, although I think they are just dowels in this case. And since it does appear that acetone thins high-tack, I am going to dump, I've just got like a cap full of acetone here. I am just going to dump the rest of this cap back in my high-tack. I think this thing of high-tack is like 20 years old. Really don't know if that made it any better or not, but it now smells like acetone. Now our move is just going to be to slip that guy right back on the axle. Make sure my jack stand is positioned such that it's not going to run away. And this may be kind of fun because I don't know if there's a way to manipulate the splines on the pump. So I may have to actually rock the axle to get the thing back in. Just make sure I don't put it on upside down or something dumb. Oh, I think this is correct. Yeah. Sure enough, I'm gonna have to fight with it a little bit to get those splines lined up. There we go, got it dripped on in. It's looking correct. The trick here is this is pointing up at about a 45 right now. Just as it's sitting on that jack stand, it's basically, I'm looking straight down on that from a stool. What I did was I just got over the top of it and straddled it with this between my legs, and then I could roll the axle around until it just dropped in. It really didn't take much. It only needed to go just a few degrees and it just fell right on. Put our 4 bolts back in, tighten them down to almost about to break off, and I think we're gonna be good to go. See if we can examine any kind of high-tech smush out or anything. Nah. Maybe a little over here. The object isn't to put so much on that happens, but if it did happen, I wouldn't be too hurt about it. That high tech I will definitely want to set up for 24 hours before I put any oil in it. I think that's going to be just fine. There are actually a couple other things I want to do on the tractor too. In the meantime, I can start banging this thing back together. So here's the setup. I got a jack stand under there just to keep it from rolling over. I got the floor jack with a block of wood to keep it even more stable than that. And back here, I've got the rear end sort of propped up on a jack stand just waiting for me. I've got the height close enough matched between the two that I don't think it'll be the worst experience of my life to get them started. All I really need to do is get that tab there, or the one on the other side, to come up over the frame rail right there. And you can see that's the bolt hole for those, and that is about 6 or 8 inches. So if I just get it started at about the midway point, I don't think it'll want to roll backward and fall off. I think I can just rest it right there and kind of regroup for my next step. Not the least of which is to set the drive shaft back in there, because if I don't, then I got to do it the hard way. And it's much easier to just boop back in the hole the way it is right now. So that's what I'm going to do. Time to get Armstrong and straddle that guy and just kind of try and walk him forward, I think. See if this is the worst day of my life or not. Oh boy. This rear end does not like to roll once it's got hydraulic pressure back on it, meaning the gear set is now turning the pump. I also need to pay attention to these linkages. Getting them flipped around the wrong way would not help things. In my treatment of this thing, I seem to somehow have narrowed the back of the frame, or maybe I'm just on a crooked angle and screwing things up. No. It pretty adamantly just doesn't want to fit between there. And I might be a little crooked. Well, poo. Yeah, the frame closed up by probably about 1/8 inch. I don't know if it's something I can just spring by hand. Yeah. Yep. That jack stand's gonna fall. I've just got a jack stand stuffed under that filter, so just to hold it while I was steering it with the tires. It's gonna have to get out of there for it to go any further. Looking at this, I'm wondering if the jack needs to come forward too. I think it does. Right now there's enough friction between the axle and the frame that's holding the jack. And that is as far forward as I can move the jack. Jack stand out of here. That did not quite do. Shit. Come on, baby. The tire's running in the freaking jack stand now. Oh, come on, we're so close. What's the problem? Oh, the filter's hitting the jack. The jack stand that was under the foot peg I've now taken out, so I might be able to push the frame back. Yep, just like that. And those ears are like 1/2 inch short of hitting the frame. Oh boy. Sorry about that, you guys are clamped to the steering wheel. Okay, so this is the disaster we're working with. The tractor is tipped on its axle. We're kind of boofed down here. but we're looking okay-ish on our jack. So I think what I'm going to do is try and pull the jack out from under the frame, see if it's going to stay there, maybe try and throw a stand under it, and then jack the rear end up and see if we can just get it in there on the jack. And yes, indeed, that is the way of the walk. Just got my boot down here on the back of my jack. I'm just giving her a little push. She's going right on in. Now I'm paying attention to the front to make sure it's not going to get pushed off the stands. I'm probably that far into the frame, so it shouldn't fall down at this point. I go in a little bit more, because now I can see the connectors for the hoses to the hydraulic pump, and the jack we just rolled up, which we didn't want to do. So I think to continue on, I actually need to pick up the back of the axle now, so that'll rotate it on in. A little hard to see, but right now those lines are back and up. So I'm trying to rotate them on down in. And I don't need to be all the way just yet, I just need to start getting that way. Yeah. I've got one tire of the tractor off the ground doing this, in the back that is. Okay, but it's not gonna fall out of the frame, and that's close enough to get the drive shaft back in, so don't forget it, and start working on trying to line stuff up. What I'm gonna try and do is just take a center punch on each side through that forward hole, and that's where that L bracket comes down, and just try and get those lined up and get a bolt on each side. Then we should be able to pivot it however we need to get the axle bolts back in. Oh no, no, no. Much like the rest of my life, everything I thought I knew was a lie. I went about this the worst possible way and took me literal extra hours to get around it. Turned this job into a complete nightmare. So don't follow my previous statement of getting those guys in first. That was a huge mistake, and I'll show you why. Slightly difficult to see now, but there's the bolt I was just talking about. Right back here is the other side of that bracket, and you'll see that it's just bolted on. So those can pivot and move around, which is what happened to me, and I did not know it. So this thing had twisted after I got this bolt in it. So then when I was trying to line up the axle bolts, they were always off by half a hole. And by the time I jacked up and down and moved around and this and that and wallered it and whatever else to figure that out, yeah, it absorbed a couple hours. So the way to actually do this is to break that guy loose and that guy out of there. That way that he can move around. This should be your last connection. Then you can get back there with a floor jack or whatever else you got and start lining up holes and get it together. It still wasn't all that much fun once I figured out what I was doing wrong, but it became, possible. Also, if you get back here and you figure that you need to pry this away or that away or whatever, this is a couple of 3/8 extensions. The 3/8 portion won't actually fit through the holes in the frame. So one extension plugged into another through the holes. Then you got a place to get on with a block of wood or a pry bar or whatever to jimmy around. The holes back here for the Cub 3-point lift, I actually do have a lift for this thing, but your tractor may or may not have bushings in the frame back here. This one happens to. If you just have holes, they're like 1-inch holes. You can shove a pipe through there if you want. The reason I had to use extensions is because that's all that would fit. The tractor is now unsplit. I have most of the leaking hydraulic bits reattached so they stop leaking. This is like an EPA Superfund side out here now, which I've tracked all through my house, so I probably have to shampoo some carpet and stuff now too. So good times, good times. So I've got things cleaned up a fair bit, and you can tell because there's fresh cardboard down there. And I've also done just a handful of things on it, like drive shafts back in it, which was not exactly awesome because there's like a little nubbins in the back of the drive shaft that has to be made up with the flange. So if you don't get those just right when you unsplit the tractor, it won't go back in very easily. I was able to pry it in there and got it in there okay, I think. A couple other lessons learned as I went along here. I really don't think it was worth the effort to leave that directional control rod attached to the rear end. I should have just taken it off here or taken it off of both ends. It just is in the way the whole time you're trying to do anything, which is why you see this bungee here that was holding it up. I actually had that on the steering wheel a short while ago. And also this is like a fine tuning for your neutral position. Like the cam down here actually has more to do with how the brakes and the hydrostat interact with each other. This is more about the position of the directional control lever, I think. And there's no jam nut on the center, at least there never was on mine. So I may have to tinker with this to get it quite right again, because I'm not sure, which way I let it flop or whatever. A bit of a mistake there. Kind of the same story on this rod, except I would absolutely not take it out of that cam plate, because like I said, that's the one with the snap ring and the washer, and it all falls apart and it's a nightmare. So I just bungee corded mine back, do the hitch attachment, and it should be pretty much a no-brainer to just flop it down in and have it pick up the brake linkage down there. Speaking of, the brake linkage rod that I thought I bent, I don't believe I did, or if I did, it's just tweaked. was able to get it back in the hole without a big deal. I don't think there was a washer on that, but I'm going to try and put one on it before I put another cotter pin back in it. I'm trying to think, oh, when mating this thing, make sure you don't adulterate your lines because they're going to be shoving around and everything. I probably should have done the same thing with these, where I just wrap a bungee cord around them and just kind of pick them up a little bit. And these do have enough give in them that you can kind of get them back where they need to go once you're done. As usual, my cooling fan was broken, so I put another cooling fan on it while the drive shaft was out. I think that is the high notes of everything I got wrong. So the next things for me to do is just reconnect all of the things and probably get my rear brakes adjusted. Basically with these, when the lever is up, which it is right now, I basically get them so they just touch. This thing basically has no brakes anyway. The rear pads have long ago been no longer available, but I'm seeing some new old stock ones out there in the world for like $70 a pad, and I'm not spending $300 to put brakes on this thing. It doesn't need them that bad. I'll figure out a custom solution when the time comes if I need to. I think for now that's about it. I'm just gonna run around, clean up those items, and see if anything else comes to mind. Got all the linkages and everything reconnected, even got brave and filled it back up with fluid, and I did learn a few lessons to share. First of all, that rod would have been a lot easier to deal with without the drive shaft in my way. Oops, is what it is. But I was able to get a washer on it, so I think you can just barely see down there. And everywhere that there's a cotter pin on this thing, like right there's the brake linkage, those are now stainless cotter pins. You guys have been on the channel for a minute, you know I like my stainless, so went ahead and did that up. It does actually have brakes now. I'm actually sitting on a tire right now. If I just moderately apply the brake, she no move. So that's good. It'll probably stay that way for about 12 seconds. My neutral indicator is off, and I'm hoping that is just the adjustment in this guy, because I can adjust that later just with the tunnel cover off. If this cam plate down here slipped, that's not going to be fun at all. It's not easy to get to. It's difficult to fine tune. It's fidgety. I'm hoping we didn't move that. I'm hoping I moved that. And for that matter, I'm hoping that that is just fine. I don't need to worry about it. Like, for it to actually point to neutral would be like right there, which I don't really care if it points to neutral as long as it is in neutral and it actually feels like it is. So I think we'll be okay. Oh yes, I also did this backward. I did this first, which of course made that harder. So don't do that. Otherwise, I think it's good. So as far as details, I think that's going to be where this video ends. I realize this part's still missing. It's because in a separate video, I intend to replace that main power wire that goes all the way on, I believe, to a starter relay up there and then comes out and goes to the starter. So mine's not in very good shape. So you guys got the detailed instructions how to pull the fenders off. The next video, I'll put detailed instructions putting them on because of course it's just the same thing the other way around. And as long as this thing doesn't have like a 1 gallon oil spill dumping out of it tonight, I'm gonna say it's probably fine. So anyway, as far as splitting, fixing that leak, let's hope, and rejoining, we're done. We'll catch up here in just a minute when it's all put back together and running. So I'm sure many of you were wondering, did we actually fix the transmission leak this year? And the answer is an astounding yes. Yes, we finally got it. This is what I'm hoping to be, a lasting thing. So I'll say the first year in probably the last at least 10 years that this thing did not have a puddle under it at all. It has just come back in the shop from its 4th trip of mowing this year. There's not a drop down on the cardboard. This was brand new cardboard when I got done with all the work. So it's probably sat there for 3 weeks and it's had a couple heat cycles and all that stuff, and there's not a drop of anything. The only thing I've noticed is that it is dripping just a little bit from like the little factory trailer hitch plate, because if you don't tape that off or something when you fill it, once it becomes full, the oil will get down on that crack and it'll just drip out of there forever. But our leak was much further forward of that, and I haven't seen a speck of anything. And just to try and give you the don't take my word for it view, normally that whole tube would be covered with like lawn grease and such by now from the leak, coming down out of the top and coating everything. So with the transmission right in there where it was really dripping, and we are totally dry, like even up in there, that is like dust just from regular old grass mowing. So I think we've accidentally got the problem fixed. So I think now in the 3rd year of covering this topic on the channel, we have finally managed to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. And I'm happy to say it, because I hate leaky crap. This thing was leaking a lot, it was leaking bad, and I know for a fact you can burn up one of those transaxles from having a recurrent leak that's not addressed, because that already happened to this thing once. It was under another owner's ownership. So I didn't do it, so don't blame me. Speaking of me, I'm happy you guys were able to join me for this video, and we will catch you on the next one. I'm Max, that's Saddington Bear, and we make videos like this all the time. Here are a couple links to some other videos we've made, and we really appreciate you guys stopping in.